The distant whistle of the steamship pierced the salty morning air as Frederick Dawson adjusted his worn leather hat and squinted against the bright sunlight reflecting off the choppy waters of San Francisco Bay. His weathered hands clutched a small tin of ginger tea, brewed fresh that morning from the recipe his mother had passed down to him before she died. The tea was for his bride, a woman he had never met, but had exchanged letters with for 8 months before agreeing to pay her passage from Boston to California territory. It was 1876, and the promise of gold and new beginnings had long since faded into the harsh reality of frontier life. At 32, Frederick had carved out a modest ranch 20 miles outside Santa Fe, New Mexico territory. He had traveled for days by train and stagecoach to meet the ship in San Francisco, knowing only that her name was Sophia Blackett. She was 26 years old, and according to her letters, she had hair the color of chestnuts and a fondness for poetry. The steamship grew larger on the horizon, its smokestack belching black clouds into the clear blue sky. Frederick's heart hammered against his ribs. He had spent years alone, working the land, building something from nothing. Now he wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. What kind of woman agreed to marry a stranger in a savage land? As the ship docked and passengers began disembarking, Frederick stood tall, his 6-foot frame easy to spot in the crowd. He watched expectantly as women in fine dresses descended the gangplank, greeted by waiting family members. His palms grew sweaty around the tin of tea. What if she had changed her mind? Then he saw her, or rather, he saw a crewman helping a pale, trembling woman down the gangplank. Her chestnut hair was pulled back in a simple bun, but strands had escaped, framing a face drawn with exhaustion. Her green traveling dress was wrinkled, and she clutched a handkerchief in one hand and the crewman's arm with the other. "Just a few more steps, madam," the sailor was saying. "You've made it through the worst." Frederick moved forward without thinking. "Miss Blackett." The woman's eyes, a startling shade of blue, lifted to his face. "Mr. Dawson." Her voice was barely a whisper, hoarse from what he could only imagine was days of sickness. "Yes, madam, I'm Frederick Dawson." He removed his hat, suddenly conscious of his dusty clothes and sun-weathered skin. "I brought you some tea, ginger. My mother always said it settled the stomach." Sophia's eyes filled with tears. "You've been waiting with ginger tea?" "Yes, madam. Your last letter mentioned you feared the sea journey. I thought it might help." The sailor grinned between them. "She's been sick since we left Boston Harbor. Poor thing. Never seen someone so determined to reach land, though." Frederick felt a surge of admiration for this woman who had endured such misery to reach him. "Let me help you, Miss Blackett." He offered his arm, and when she took it, he was surprised at how small her hand felt against his sleeve. "Thank you," she murmured, and then to his alarm she swayed dangerously. Frederick acted quickly, passing the tea to the sailor and catching Sophia before she could fall. "I've got you," he said softly. "You're on solid ground now." "I never want to see another ship as long as I live," she whispered, attempting a weak smile that transformed her tired face into something that made Frederick's breath catch. He retrieved her trunk, a single, modest piece of luggage that contained her entire life before him, and secured them a room at a nearby hotel. He had planned to start the journey back to Santa Fe immediately, but one look at Sophia told him she needed rest. The hotel room was simple but clean. Frederick left Sophia at the door. "I'll wait downstairs in the lobby while you rest," he said awkwardly. "Please," she said, reaching out to touch his sleeve. "Could you stay? Just until I fall asleep. I've been surrounded by strangers for so long." Frederick nodded, suddenly unable to speak. He pulled a chair near the window while Sophia removed her shoes and lay down on the bed fully clothed. "Tell me about your ranch," she said, her eyes already closing. "I want to imagine the place that will be my home." Frederick cleared his throat. "It's not much yet. 20 acres with a creek running through the south pasture. The house has 2 rooms, but I've been adding a third for you. There are mountains to the east that turn purple at sunset. In spring, wildflowers cover the fields like a painter went wild with his colors." He continued describing the land, the few cattle he'd managed to acquire, the vegetable garden behind the house, until he realized Sophia was asleep, her breathing deep and even. Frederick watched her for a moment, this brave, seasick woman who had traveled across a continent to marry him. "Welcome to the West, Miss Blackett," he whispered, and settled in to keep his vigil. Sophia woke to unfamiliar sounds, horses' hooves on cobblestone, distant shouts of dock workers, the call of seagulls. For a moment, panic gripped her as she thought she was still on the ship, but then she felt the blessed stillness beneath her. Land. Solid, unmoving land. She opened her eyes to find Frederick Dawson asleep in a chair by the window, his long legs stretched out before him, hat tipped over his face. In the warm afternoon light, she studied him properly for the first time. He wasn't handsome in the conventional way men in Boston might be considered handsome. His face was tanned from years in the sun, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled often. His hands, even in sleep, looked strong and capable. But what struck her most was how he had waited not just at the dock but here in this room, keeping watch while she slept. As if sensing her gaze, Frederick stirred, the hat tumbling from his face. He blinked, then sat up straighter when he saw she was awake. "Miss Blackett, how are you feeling?" "Better," she said, and realized it was true. "The land has stopped moving at last." He smiled, and those lines around his eyes deepened. "Hungry?" Only then did Sophia realize she was famished. She hadn't been able to keep food down for most of the journey. Starving, actually. "There's a decent restaurant downstairs. Nothing fancy, but the food is good." Sophia ran a hand over her rumpled dress. "I should change first." Frederick stood. "I'll wait in the hallway." Alone. Sophia opened her trunk and pulled out her second-best dress, a blue calico that had seen better days but was clean and presentable. She quickly changed, washed her face in the basin by the bed, and arranged her hair as best she could without a lady's maid. In Boston, she had worked as a seamstress, not wealthy enough to afford help but not so poor as to be desperate. Until her father died, leaving debts that threatened to consume what little she had. Becoming a mail-order bride hadn't been her first choice, but Frederick's letters had been kind, thoughtful, and honest. He didn't promise riches or an easy life, but he offered respect and partnership. After receiving proposals from men who seemed more interested in acquiring a household servant than a wife, Frederick's simple dignity had stood out. When she opened the door, she found him leaning against the opposite wall, hat in hand. He straightened immediately, and she noticed his hair was the color of wheat, with a slight wave that suggested he usually kept it shorter than it was now. "You look nice," he said, then seemed embarrassed by his own words. "Thank you. I'm afraid I'm not at my best after such a journey." "You crossed a continent and an ocean. I reckon you're allowed to look however you please." The restaurant was indeed simple, but the smell of roasting meat and fresh bread made Sophia's mouth water. They were seated at a small table near the window, and for a moment neither spoke, both suddenly aware of the strangeness of their situation. "Your letters," Sophia finally said. "They made this place sound beautiful." "Santa Fe." Frederick nodded. "It is, in its way, not like the East, of course. Harsher, more honest maybe, and your ranch, small, growing." He smiled slightly. "I've got 6 cows now, not 4, added 2 since my last letter." Sophia couldn't help but smile at his pride. "A 50% increase, impressive." His eyes crinkled. You've got a head for figures. My father was an accountant. He taught me. She hesitated. Mr. Dawson, Frederick, please, or Fred if you prefer. Frederick, I want to be honest with you. I'm not. I've never lived anywhere but a city. I don't know the first thing about ranching or the West. He nodded slowly. I figured as much, but you can learn if you're willing. I am. She took a deep breath. And there's something else you should know. The reason I became a mail-order bride. My father left debts. Many debts. I had to sell almost everything to pay them, but it wasn't enough. The alternative was debtor's prison or, she stopped, unable to voice the other offers she'd received. Frederick's expression darkened. No one is coming after you now, are they? No. I managed to settle with the worst of the creditors before I left. But I want you to know I didn't choose this lightly, and I don't bring anything to this marriage except myself and what's in that trunk. That's more than enough, he said simply. I didn't ask for a dowry in my advertisement. I asked for a partner. The waiter arrived with their food, roast beef, potatoes, and fresh bread for Frederick. A lighter soup and bread for Sophia, as Frederick had thoughtfully ordered with her recovering stomach in mind. As they ate, Frederick told her more about Santa Fe and the journey they would begin tomorrow. 3 days by train to reach the New Mexico territory, then 2 more by stagecoach to Santa Fe. The roads are rough, but the scenery makes up for it. And your ranch is outside the town, about 20 miles. We'll stay 1 night in Santa Fe to rest, then I've arranged for a wagon to take us home. Home. Such a simple word, yet it held such weight. Sophia wondered if she would ever truly feel at home in this wild country. Tell me, Frederick said, interrupting her thoughts, what do you like to do? Besides poetry, I mean. I sew. I was a seamstress in Boston. I'm quite good, actually. That's a useful skill out here. The nearest dressmaker is in Santa Fe, and most folks can't afford her prices. I also like to read. I brought some books, but I had to leave most behind. There's a small lending library in town. Not much, but they get new books now and then. He hesitated. I like to read, too. Got a shelf of books at the ranch. Mostly practical things, farming guides, animal husbandry, but some novels, too. Sophia felt a small weight lift from her heart. They had this in common, at least. What's your favorite book? Frederick thought for a moment. 2 years before the mast. Richard Henry Dana's account of sailing around Cape Horn to California. Though maybe that's not what you want to hear about right now, he added with a small smile. Sophia laughed, surprising herself. Perhaps not, though I admit I'm curious about what could make someone voluntarily go to sea. They continued talking as they ate, discovering small connections. Both had lost their mothers young. Both enjoyed autumn best of all seasons. Both had a sweet tooth that preferred maple sugar to refined cane sugar. By the time they returned to the hotel, the awkwardness between them had eased somewhat. Frederick escorted her to her room but didn't enter. I've taken a room down the hall, he said. We leave on the 8 o'clock train tomorrow if you're feeling up to it. I will be, Sophia assured him. He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. I almost forgot. I brought this for you. Sophia unwrapped it to find a simple silver pendant in the shape of a rose. It's beautiful, she said, genuinely touched. It was my mother's. I thought you might like something. Well, something that connects you to the family you're joining, small as it is. Thank you, I'll treasure it. And she meant it. Frederick nodded, suddenly awkward again. Good night, then. I'll knock at 7. Good night, Frederick. Alone in her room, Sophia held the pendant to her chest and looked out the window at the unfamiliar city. Tomorrow they would begin the journey to a place she had only imagined, to start a life with a man she barely knew. The thought should have terrified her, but somehow it didn't. Perhaps it was the way Frederick had waited with ginger tea, or how carefully he had ordered her dinner, or the thoughtful gift of his mother's pendant. Whatever the reason, for the first time since leaving Boston, Sophia felt something like hope. The journey inland proved easier on Sophia's constitution than the sea voyage, though the constant motion of the train still left her occasionally queasy. Frederick was attentive without being overbearing, making sure she ate regularly and rested when needed. As the landscape changed from the lush coastal regions to the more arid interior, Sophia found herself captivated by the vast, open spaces so different from Boston's crowded streets. On the second day, as they crossed into Nevada territory, a group of men in the train car began drinking heavily and growing rowdy. Their loud comments about the pretty little lady traveling alone with Frederick became increasingly crude. Sophia pretended not to hear, but Frederick's jaw tightened when one of the men stumbled down the aisle and accidentally fell against Sophia, his hand landing on her shoulder. Frederick was on his feet in an instant. Without raising his voice, he said, "You'll want to remove your hand and apologize to my wife." The man, red-faced from whiskey, sneered. "Don't see a ring on her finger. Besides, what's a delicate thing like her doing with a rough cowboy? Bet she'd prefer a real gentleman." Frederick didn't blink. "I won't ask again." Something in his quiet tone made the man hesitate. He looked at Frederick's weathered face, noted the quiet confidence in his stance, and seemed to reconsider. "No offense meant," he muttered, removing his hand. "The apology," the man grimaced but turned to Sophia. "Sorry, madam." Frederick nodded once, and the man retreated to his friends, who had suddenly found their drinks very interesting. Frederick resumed his seat beside Sophia as if nothing had happened. "Thank you," she said softly. "No need to thank me. That's not how a lady should be treated." He paused. "I'm sorry he called you my wife. I know we haven't. That is, we agreed to wait until we reached Santa Fe for the ceremony." Sophia felt her cheeks warm. "It's fine. It was simpler than explaining our arrangement to strangers." Frederick nodded, looking relieved. They had indeed agreed via letter that they would be married by the Justice of the Peace in Santa Fe before continuing to the ranch. It had seemed the most proper way to handle their unusual situation. "You called them cowboys," Sophia said after a moment. "Is that what you are? A cowboy?" Frederick chuckled. "I suppose so, though I've never been on one of the big cattle drives. Mostly I'm a rancher raising cattle on a small scale, growing enough to feed us and maybe sell a little in town." "Us," Sophia repeated quietly. Frederick's eyes met hers. "That's the plan, isn't it? Unless you've changed your mind." "No," she said quickly. "I haven't changed my mind." The intensity of his gaze made her look away first. She was still getting used to the directness of Western men. In Boston, gentlemen were more circumspect, more restrained in their manners. Frederick wasn't crude or improper, but there was an honesty in his gaze that both unnerved and attracted her. They reached the end of the rail line on the third day and transferred to a stagecoach for the remainder of the journey to Santa Fe. The stagecoach proved to be a more challenging experience than the train. The roads were rough, the coach crowded, and the constant jostling left Sophia feeling almost as ill as she had on the ship. By midday of the second day on the stagecoach, they were forced to stop when one of the wheels cracked. The driver announced repairs would take several hours, and the passengers disembarked to stretch their legs in the small way station. Sophia walked a little distance from the station, desperate for fresh air. The landscape was unlike anything she had ever seen: red rock formations rising from the dusty earth, scrubby vegetation clinging to life in the harsh environment, and the sky, an endless expanse of the most intense blue she had ever witnessed. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Frederick had followed her, keeping a respectful distance. "It's so vast," she said. In Boston, the buildings block the horizon. Here, it feels like you can see forever. That's what drew me here. After the war, I couldn't stand being hemmed in anymore. This was the first he had mentioned serving in the war. You fought in the war between the states, Frederick nodded. Union Army, 4 years from beginning to end. Sophia could see he didn't want to elaborate, so she changed the subject. How much farther to Santa Fe? We should arrive by tomorrow afternoon if the wheel is fixed soon. Then it's 1 more day to the ranch. He studied her face. Are you holding up all right? I'm fine. Just not used to so much traveling. We can rest in Santa Fe as long as you need before continuing to the ranch. And the wedding? Sophia asked, suddenly nervous about the reality of what they were undertaking. I sent a telegram ahead from San Francisco. The justice of the peace is expecting us, but there's no rush. If you need time, no, Sophia interrupted. I don't need time, we've come this far. There's no sense in delaying. Frederick's expression was unreadable. All right then, we'll be married in Santa Fe as planned. The stagecoach was repaired by late afternoon, and they continued their journey as the sun began to sink behind the mesas, painting the landscape in shades of gold and crimson. Sophia found herself dozing against Frederick's shoulder, too exhausted to maintain the proper distance between them. When she awoke with a start, embarrassed, he merely smiled. You needed the rest, he said simply. They arrived in Santa Fe the following afternoon, dusty and exhausted. The town was larger than Sophia had expected, a curious blend of Spanish, native, and American influences. Adobe buildings lined the streets, their earthy tones complemented by bright splashes of color from flowers and painted doors. Frederick secured them rooms at a modest hotel near the plaza. I'll meet you for dinner in an hour, he said as they parted in the hallway. There's a bathhouse if you'd like to wash off the trail dust. Sophia nearly wept at the thought of a proper bath. An hour later, clean and wearing her best dress, a dark blue silk that had been her mother's, and was now slightly outdated but still elegant, she met Frederick in the hotel dining room. He had also bathed and changed into clean clothes, and his hair was still damp from washing. You look lovely, he said, standing as she approached. Thank you. It feels wonderful to be clean again. Over dinner, they discussed practical matters, the wedding the next day, supplies they needed to purchase before heading to the ranch, what Sophia might need for her new life that she hadn't brought with her. I arranged for the ceremony at noon, Frederick said. I hope that's acceptable. It gives us time to do some shopping in the morning and still reach the ranch before dark. That sounds perfect. Sophia hesitated. Will anyone be there? As witnesses, I mean. Frederick looked apologetic. I have a few acquaintances in town, but no close friends here. The justice said his clerk can serve as a witness. Oh, I see. Sophia tried to hide her disappointment. She had always imagined at least a few friendly faces at her wedding, even a simple one. Frederick seemed to sense her feelings. There's a woman who owns the mercantile, Mrs. Harriet Johnson. She's been kind to me over the years. I could ask if she'd attend if you'd like another woman there. Sophia smiled, touched by his consideration. I'd like that very much, thank you. After dinner, they walked around the plaza, Frederick pointing out various buildings and explaining the town's history. As the evening air grew cooler, he offered her his arm and she took it, acutely aware of the strength she could feel beneath his sleeve. Are you nervous? About tomorrow? He asked as they circled back toward the hotel. Sophia considered lying, then decided on honesty. Yes, aren't you? Terrified, he admitted with a small smile. I've faced rebel soldiers that scared me less. His candor made her laugh, easing some of her own tension. Why did you decide to advertise for a wife, if you don't mind my asking? Frederick was quiet for a moment. Loneliness, I suppose. The life I've chosen isn't an easy one, but it's even harder alone, and He paused. I want a family someday, children. I want that too, Sophia said softly. They had reached the hotel. At her door, Frederick took her hand gently. I know this isn't the marriage you probably dreamed of as a girl, but I promise to be a good husband to you, Sophia. I'll work hard to make you happy here. The sincerity in his eyes made her throat tight. And I promise to be a good wife to you, Frederick. He raised her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Until tomorrow, then. Until tomorrow. Sophia slept fitfully that night, her dreams a confusing mixture of ocean waves, train whistles, and Frederick's face. She awoke early, watching the sunrise paint the adobe buildings with golden light. Today, she would become Mrs. Frederick Dawson, wife to a man she had known for less than a week. Yet somehow, it felt right. In their short time together, Frederick had shown himself to be kind, honorable, and thoughtful. He didn't make grand promises or sweep her off her feet with romance, but his steady presence had already become a comfort to her. Perhaps that was a better foundation for marriage than the fleeting passion her novels often described. The morning was spent purchasing supplies, dried goods, cloth, seeds for planting, and a few cooking utensils Sophia would need. Frederick insisted on buying her a new bonnet when he caught her admiring it in the mercantile window. A wedding gift, he said, placing it carefully on her head, though it can't compare to your beauty. Sophia blushed, unused to such direct compliments. Thank you, Mrs. Johnson, the mercantile owner, was delighted to be invited to the wedding. I've known Frederick for 5 years, she told Sophia as she wrapped their purchases. Never met a more honest man. You've chosen well. Actually, he chose me, Sophia admitted. I'm a mail-order bride, Mrs. Johnson smiled kindly. However it happened, I can see he's smitten with you, and if I'm not mistaken, the feeling might be mutual. Sophia felt her cheeks warm again. He's been very kind. Kindness is a good start. The rest comes with time. The older woman patted her hand. I'll bring flowers for your bouquet. At noon, they gathered at the Justice of the Peace's office, a small, whitewashed room with a desk and a few chairs. True to her word, Mrs. Johnson arrived with a bouquet of wildflowers tied with a blue ribbon. She had also brought her husband, a quiet man who shook Frederick's hand firmly and nodded approval at Sophia. The ceremony was brief but dignified. The justice, a balding man with kind eyes, spoke of the responsibilities of marriage and the sacred bond they were creating. When he asked for the ring, Frederick produced a simple gold band. It was my grandmother's, he explained as he slipped it onto Sophia's finger. It was slightly loose, but she curled her hand to keep it in place. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the justice declared. You may kiss your bride. Frederick hesitated, then leaned down to press a gentle, almost reverent kiss to Sophia's lips. It was over in a moment, but it left her feeling strangely breathless. Mrs. Johnson dabbed at her eyes. Every wedding makes me cry, no matter how many I attend. They signed the marriage certificate, accepted congratulations from the small group, and walked out into the bright Santa Fe sunlight as husband and wife. Frederick had arranged for a wagon loaded with their supplies, and after a quick meal at the hotel, they set off for the ranch. As Santa Fe receded behind them, Sophia felt a curious mixture of trepidation and anticipation. She was leaving behind everything familiar, heading into an unknown future with a man who was now her husband but still largely a stranger. The landscape grew wilder as they traveled, the road rougher. Frederick pointed out landmarks, a distinctive rock formation, a creek that ran year-round even in the driest seasons, a distant mountain range that marked the boundary of his property. There, he said finally, as they crested a small rise. That's home." Sophia followed his gaze to a modest cabin nestled against a backdrop of cottonwood trees. A small barn stood to one side, and beyond it, she could make out a fenced pasture where cattle grazed. It was simple, almost primitive compared to the buildings she was used to, but there was something appealing about its sturdy construction and the way it seemed to belong to the landscape. "It's not much," Frederick said, a note of apology in his voice. "It's exactly as you described in your letters," Sophia replied. "I can see the creek and the mountains that turn purple at sunset." The relief on his face was obvious. "I've been working on the new room. It's not quite finished, needs paint and proper curtains, but it's sound. And I built a separate wash house out back." As they drew closer, Sophia could see evidence of Frederick's careful planning: the vegetable garden neatly fenced to keep animals out, the woodpile stacked high against the coming winter, the clean sweep of the yard. He helped her down from the wagon, his hands strong and sure at her waist. For a moment they stood facing each other, both suddenly aware that they were truly alone for the first time. This was their home now. They were husband and wife. "Welcome home, Mrs. Dawson," Frederick said softly, and in his eyes, Sophia saw not just kindness but a spark of something more, a hopeful beginning. The first weeks of marriage were a delicate dance of adjustment and discovery. Frederick insisted Sophia take the bedroom while he slept on a pallet in the main room until the new addition was finished. Each morning, she woke to find the fire already lit and coffee brewing on the stove. Each evening, they shared the tasks of preparing dinner and cleaning up afterward, establishing a routine that became comfortably familiar. Sophia threw herself into learning the skills she would need as a rancher's wife. Her first attempts at baking bread in the temperamental wood stove resulted in charred exteriors and doughy centers, but Frederick ate each loaf without complaint. When she finally produced a perfect golden brown loaf, his genuine delight made her feel more accomplished than any compliment she'd received for her finest needlework in Boston. Frederick, in turn, patiently taught her about the ranch: how to gather eggs without upsetting the hens, how to tell when the vegetables were ready for harvesting, how to milk the cow he kept for fresh dairy. He never criticized her mistakes, only offered gentle correction when needed. They worked side by side to finish the new bedroom, Sophia sewing curtains from fabric they had purchased in Santa Fe, while Frederick completed the plastering and painting. When it was finished, they stood in the doorway admiring their work. "It's lovely," Sophia said, genuinely pleased with the bright, airy room with its view of the mountains. "It's yours," Frederick replied. "I'll take the old bedroom." Sophia turned to him, surprised. "But this is your house. You should have the new room." "Our house," he corrected gently. "And I built this room for you. I want you to have it." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched her deeply. "Thank you." That night, lying in her new bed, Sophia reflected on the strange path that had led her here. In just over a month, she had traveled across a continent, married a stranger, and begun a life utterly different from anything she had known before. Yet somehow, it felt increasingly right. Frederick had been true to his word. He was a good husband, considerate and hardworking. He never pressed her for the physical aspects of marriage, seeming content with their growing companionship. Sometimes, she caught him watching her with a warmth in his eyes that made her heart beat faster, but he always looked away quickly, as if afraid of making her uncomfortable. As autumn progressed, the days grew shorter and cooler. Frederick worked from dawn to dusk preparing the ranch for winter, repairing fences, securing the barn, cutting and stacking more firewood. Sophia preserved the last of the garden's bounty, filling the root cellar with jars of vegetables and fruits that would see them through the cold months. One evening in late October, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Frederick seemed preoccupied, repeatedly starting to speak and then falling silent again. "Is something troubling you?" Sophia finally asked. Frederick set aside the harness he had been repairing. "I received a letter from the bank in Santa Fe today. They've approved my loan application." "That's wonderful news, isn't it? It means I can buy the Henderson place that adjoins our property to the north. Another 40 acres with good water access." He hesitated. "But it also means more work, more responsibility." "You're worried about taking it on." "I'm worried about asking you to take it on," he admitted. "This life is hard enough already. Expanding means longer days, tighter finances for a while. It's not what you signed up for." Sophia set down her mending and moved to sit beside him on the bench. "Actually, it's exactly what I signed up for. I agreed to be your partner, remember? That means sharing the burdens as well as the rewards." Frederick's eyes searched her face. "You've adapted so well to everything. Sometimes I forget how recently you arrived, how different this must be from your life in Boston." "I won't pretend it's been easy," Sophia said honestly. "But I don't regret coming here. I don't regret marrying you." Something shifted in Frederick's expression, a softening, a hope. Slowly, giving her time to move away if she wished, he reached up to touch her cheek. "Sophia!" A sharp knock at the door interrupted them. Frederick's hand dropped away as he rose to answer it. A man stood on the porch, his clothes dusty from travel. "Dawson." "I'm Jim Cooper from the next valley over. We need help. A group of rustlers hit 3 ranches yesterday and they're headed this way. We're gathering men for a posse." Frederick's expression hardened. "How many rustlers?" "At least 6, maybe more. They're well armed." Frederick turned to Sophia. "I have to go." Fear gripped her heart, but she nodded. "Of course you do. Bar the door after I leave. There's a rifle in the cabinet. Do you know how to use it?" "No, but you can show me." Frederick quickly explained the basics of loading and firing the weapon. "Just the sound of it will scare off most trouble," he assured her. "I'll be back as soon as I can." He gathered his coat, gun, belt, and hat, then hesitated at the door. Before Sophia could react, he pulled her into a fierce embrace. "Be safe," he whispered against her hair. "You too," she replied, clinging to him for a moment before stepping back. With one last look, Frederick joined the waiting man and disappeared into the darkness. Sophia barred the door as instructed, checked the rifle, and settled in for a long, anxious night. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Every creak of the cabin's timbers, every rustle of wind through the trees outside made Sophia start. She kept the fire burning and the rifle close at hand, unable to sleep. Dawn was just breaking when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Cautiously, she moved to the window, the rifle ready. Relief flooded through her when she recognized Frederick's broad-shouldered silhouette. She unbarred the door and rushed outside. "You're back!" Frederick dismounted wearily. There was a smudge of dirt on his face and his clothes were even more dusty than when he'd left, but he appeared unharmed. "We caught them crossing Miller's Creek. No shots fired, thank God. They're locked up in the Santa Fe jail now." "You're all right?" Sophia asked, examining him for injuries. "Just tired and worried about you. I'm fine. I didn't sleep, but nothing happened here." Frederick cupped her face in his hands, his eyes intense. "I couldn't stop thinking about you, about what might have happened if they'd come here instead." "But they didn't," she said softly. "And you're home now." "Home," he repeated as if the word held new meaning. Then, with a gentleness that belied his strength, he lowered his mouth to hers. Unlike their brief wedding kiss, this one lingered. Sophia's hands found their way to his shoulders, then slid up to tangle in his hair. When they finally parted, both were breathing unevenly. "I should have done that sooner," Frederick murmured. "I've wanted to for weeks." "Why didn't you?" "I was afraid it was too soon. That you might feel obligated. Sophia shook her head. Not obligated, never that. He smiled then, the first truly unguarded smile she had seen from him. Come inside. I need to wash this trail dust off, and then, Mrs. Dawson, I believe we have a conversation to finish. Inside the cabin, Sophia heated water while Frederick tended to his horse. By the time he returned, she had prepared a basin for washing and a hot breakfast. He ate gratefully, then used the water to clean away the dust of the trail. About last night, he began, once he was settled in his chair by the fire. What I was trying to say before Cooper arrived. Sophia, I know our marriage began as an arrangement, but it's become much more than that to me. Sophia's heart quickened. To me as well. I love you, Frederick said simply. I think I began falling in love with you when I saw you coming down that gangplank in San Francisco, sick as a dog but still determined to reach land. And every day since then, I've found more reasons to love you. Tears pricked Sophia's eyes. I love you too. I wasn't sure at first if what I felt was real or just gratitude for your kindness. But now I know it's real. It's the most real thing I've ever felt. Frederick crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms. This time, their kiss held no hesitation, only a hunger that had been building for weeks. When they finally broke apart, Frederick rested his forehead against hers. I should warn you, he said with a gentle smile, that now that I can kiss you properly, I may never want to stop. Sophia laughed, a sound of pure joy. I don't see that as a problem, Mr. Dawson. That night, for the first time, they shared the new bedroom. Frederick's touches were both reverent and passionate as he showed Sophia the physical expression of the love that had grown between them. Afterward, lying in his arms as the moonlight filtered through the curtains she had sewn, Sophia marveled at the journey that had brought her to this place, to this man. Are you happy? Frederick murmured against her hair. Completely, she answered truthfully. Are you? More than I ever thought possible. In the morning, they rose early as usual, but there was a new intimacy in their routine casual touches as they passed each other. Shared smiles over coffee, a lingering kiss before Frederick went out to tend the animals. Life on the ranch continued with its daily demands, but now the work was sweetened by the love they shared openly. When the first snow of winter blanketed the land in white silence, they celebrated by the fire with mulled cider and plans for the future. I'll start building the new barn on the Henderson place as soon as the ground thaws in spring, Frederick said, absently stroking Sophia's hair as she leaned against his chest. And I've been thinking about raising chickens to sell eggs in town, Sophia added. Mrs. Johnson says there's always a market for fresh eggs. My clever wife, Frederick said proudly, always thinking ahead. Spring arrived in a riot of wildflowers, just as Frederick had described in San Francisco. Sophia often found herself pausing in her work to admire the beauty of the land that had become her home. The memories of her seasickness on the journey seemed distant now, like something that had happened to someone else. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset turn the mountains the promised shade of purple, Sophia reached for Frederick's hand. I have something to tell you. He turned to her, eyebrows raised questioningly. I'm going to have a baby, in late autumn. Frederick's expression transformed from surprise to wonder to joy in the space of a heartbeat. A baby, you're sure? Sophia nodded, smiling at his reaction. Quite sure. He gathered her into his arms, laughing and crying at once. A baby, he repeated as if testing the word. Our baby. Our family, Sophia corrected gently. Frederick placed a hand reverently on her still flat stomach. I promise you both, he said solemnly, that I will be the best husband and father I can be, that I will protect you and provide for you always. I know you will, Sophia said, covering his hand with her own. just as I will be the best wife and mother I can be." As the purple light faded from the mountains, and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Frederick and Sophia Dawson held each other close, secure in their love and the promise of the future they were building together, a future that had begun with seasickness and ginger tea on a San Francisco dock. The months passed in a blur of activity, as Frederick worked tirelessly to prepare for the baby's arrival. He expanded the new bedroom to create a small nursery adjoining it, crafted a sturdy cradle from pine harvested from their land, and traveled to Santa Fe to purchase supplies they would need for the infant's soft flannel for diapers, tiny garments that Sophia modified with her skilled hands, and a rocking chair that became her favorite place to sit as her belly grew rounded with their child. Summer's heat gave way to the crisp days of autumn. Sophia's time grew near, and Frederick arranged for the midwife from a neighboring ranch to stay with them for the final weeks. Mrs. Abigail Fletcher was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who had delivered most of the children born within 50 miles. "You've got good wide hips," she told Sophia approvingly after examining her, "and the baby's position just right. Should be a straightforward birth when the time comes." Frederick hovered anxiously, asking endless questions until Mrs. Fletcher finally shooed him out of the house. "Go chop some wood or mend a fence," she ordered. "Your wife is fine, and I'll call you if that changes." On a cool October morning, Sophia woke to the first pains. By mid-afternoon, Mrs. Fletcher had sent an increasingly agitated Frederick to pace on the porch while she helped Sophia through the intensifying labor. Night fell, and still the child held back, as if reluctant to enter the world. "Is this normal?" Frederick demanded when Mrs. Fletcher emerged briefly for fresh water. "It's been hours. Every birth has its own time," the midwife replied calmly. "Your wife is strong and everything is proceeding as it should. First babies often take their time." Another hour passed before a different sound reached Frederick's ears, the thin, indignant wail of a newborn. He burst through the door without waiting for permission, finding Sophia pale but smiling as Mrs. Fletcher placed a tiny, red-faced bundle in her arms. "You have a son," the midwife announced unnecessarily. "A fine, healthy boy." Frederick approached the bed almost reverently, his eyes fixed on the small form nestled against Sophia's breast. "He's perfect," he whispered, reaching out to touch a miniature hand that immediately curled around his finger. "Just like his mother. Would you like to hold him?" Sophia asked, her voice tired but happy. Frederick carefully gathered his son into his arms, marveling at how little he weighed and yet how completely he filled the empty spaces in his heart he hadn't known existed. "Hello, little man," he murmured. "I'm your father. What will you name him, Mrs. Fletcher asked as she bustled about cleaning up. Sophia and Frederick exchanged a glance. They had discussed names but hadn't settled on one. "Samuel," Sophia said suddenly. "After my father, Samuel Frederick Dawson." Frederick smiled his approval. "A good, strong name for a good, strong boy." Life reorganized itself around young Samuel's needs: midnight feedings, diaper changes, the miracle of his first smile. Frederick found himself rushing through chores to return to the house, eager to see what new development might have occurred in his absence. Sophia bloomed in motherhood, her natural grace extending to this new role as if she had been born to it. Winter arrived with unusual ferocity that year. Snow piled deep around the cabin, and icy winds found every crack in the walls. Frederick kept the fires burning day and night, worried about keeping Sophia and Samuel warm enough. "We need more supplies," he announced one morning, frowning at their dwindling stores. The winter had lasted longer than they had anticipated. "I'll have to go into Santa Fe. Is it safe to travel?" Sophia asked, concerned. "The snow is so deep. If I wait for it to clear, we'll run out of flour and coffee, and we need more medicine for Samuel's cough. Their son had developed a slight cold, nothing serious according to Mrs. Fletcher, who had checked him the week before, but it worried them nonetheless. Reluctantly, Sophia helped him prepare for the journey. "Promise me you'll find shelter if the weather worsens. Don't try to push through a blizzard just to get home sooner." "I promise." Frederick kissed her, then bent to press his lips to Samuel's forehead. "Take care of your mother, little man. I'll be back before you know it." The journey to Santa Fe was arduous, the trails nearly impassable in places. Frederick had to dig the wagon out of drifts twice, before finally reaching town late in the day. He quickly purchased the supplies they needed, plus a few extras candy sticks for Sophia, who had developed a sweet tooth during her pregnancy that never quite disappeared, and a small wooden horse for Samuel. Though at 4 months old, the boy was still too young to play with it. He had hoped to start for home immediately, but the stable owner shook his head when Frederick mentioned his plans. "Storm's brewing," he warned. "You'd best stay the night and head out at first light." Frederick chafed at the delay but knew the man was right. He secured a room at the hotel and tried to sleep, thinking of Sophia and Samuel alone in the cabin. They would be fine, he told himself. The pantry still had enough to see them through another day, and the woodpile was well stocked. Morning dawned clear and cold, much to Frederick's relief. He set out at first light, pushing the horses as fast as he dared on the snow-covered trails. By mid-afternoon, he had reached the halfway point and was beginning to think he might make it home before dark. Then the storm hit, not with the gradual buildup of most winter squalls, but a sudden, violent onslaught that reduced visibility to mere feet. Snow driven by howling winds quickly obscured the trail. Frederick pulled his coat tighter and urged the horses forward, determined to reach home. But after an hour of struggling against the elements, even he had to admit defeat. He could no longer be certain which direction he was heading, and the horses were beginning to flounder in the deepening snow. Remembering his promise to Sophia, he looked for shelter. A stand of thick pines offered some protection from the wind. Frederick guided the wagon beneath their branches and unhitched the horses, covering them with blankets from the wagon. Then he crawled into the wagon bed, burrowed under the remaining blankets, and prepared to wait out the storm. The night was long and bitterly cold. Frederick dozed fitfully, waking often to check on the horses and clear accumulating snow from the wagon. He thought of Sophia, imagining her worry when he didn't return as expected, and prayed she wouldn't attempt to come looking for him. Dawn brought a temporary lull in the storm. Frederick seized the opportunity, hitched the horses, and set off again. Progress was painfully slow through the deep snow, but at least he could now see landmarks that confirmed he was heading in the right direction. By mid-morning, the storm had resumed its fury. Frederick pressed on, knowing he must be close to home. When he finally caught sight of smoke rising from the cabin's chimney, his relief was so intense he nearly wept. Sophia must have been watching for him. The door flew open as he approached, and she ran out into the snow, Samuel bundled against her chest. "Frederick, thank God!" He jumped from the wagon and caught her in his arms, holding both her and their son close. "I'm sorry I'm late." "The storm, I thought you were lost," Sophia interrupted, her voice breaking. "When you didn't come back yesterday." "I promised I'd return to you," Frederick reminded her gently, "and I always keep my promises." Inside the warm cabin, Sophia prepared hot coffee while Frederick unloaded the supplies and tended to the exhausted horses. Samuel, now recovered from his cold, watched from his cradle with bright, curious eyes. That night, as they lay together in the darkness, Sophia pressed closer to Frederick's side. "When the storm hit, I was so afraid, All I could think was that Samuel might grow up without knowing you." Frederick stroked her hair. "That won't happen. We have a lifetime ahead of us, Sophia. Many years to watch our son grow, perhaps to welcome more children." "I'd like that," Sophia murmured. "A house full of children. And I'll build us a bigger house," Frederick promised. "Now that the Henderson place is starting to pay off, we can afford to expand." "I don't need a bigger house," Sophia said, lifting her head to look at him in the dim firelight. "I just need you and Samuel and this life we're building together." Frederick kissed her softly. "You have me, always." The years flowed by like the creek that ran through their property, sometimes rushing forward in moments of drama, sometimes moving quietly in days of routine work and simple pleasures. True to Frederick's prediction, their family grew. 2 years after Samuel's birth, Sophia delivered twins, a boy and a girl they named James and Elizabeth. 3 years later came another daughter, Grace. The ranch prospered under their careful stewardship. Frederick added cattle each year, eventually employing 2 hired hands to help with the expanding herd. Sophia's chicken business thrived, her eggs sought after not only in Santa Fe, but by the luxury hotels that had begun to appear as the railroad extended its reach into the territory. They built the promised larger house when the twins were toddlers, a 6-room structure with proper glass windows and a broad porch that wrapped around 2 sides. Sophia planted flower gardens that bloomed from early spring until the first frost, and Frederick constructed swings for the children that hung from the massive cottonwood trees. Samuel grew into a thoughtful young man with his father's height and his mother's blue eyes. At 16, he began accompanying Frederick on cattle drives to the railroad depot, learning the business that would someday be his. The twins were as different as siblings could be: James loud and adventurous, Elizabeth quiet and bookish. Little Grace, with her curly chestnut hair and infectious laugh, was the darling of the family. On a warm September afternoon in 1896, 20 years after Sophia had first stepped off that ship in San Francisco, the Dawsons gathered on the porch to celebrate Frederick's 52nd birthday. The table was laden with food: fried chicken, fresh corn, biscuits with honey from their own hives, and a chocolate cake that was Frederick's favorite. Samuel, now 20, had brought his sweetheart, Maria, the daughter of a neighboring rancher. The twins, at 18, were planning their futures. James intended to attend the agricultural college in Las Cruces, while Elizabeth had secured a position as a schoolteacher in Santa Fe. 15-year-old Grace was still determining her path, though she showed talent with horses that suggested she might continue the ranching tradition. As Sophia watched her family, her handsome, still vigorous husband at the head of the table, their children healthy and happy, the ranch stretching out before them in well-tended prosperity, she marveled at how far they had come from those first uncertain days. "A penny for your thoughts," Frederick said, noticing her contemplative expression. "I was just thinking about our beginning," Sophia replied. "How seasick I was on that ship, how you waited at the dock with ginger tea." Frederick smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling in the way she had always loved. "Best decision I ever made, writing that advertisement for a mail-order bride." "Best decision I ever made, answering it," Sophia returned, reaching for his hand. Later, after the dishes were cleared and the children had scattered to their various pursuits, Frederick and Sophia sat together on the porch swing, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold. "I got a letter from the Hendersons today," Frederick said, referring to the family from whom they had purchased their additional land all those years ago. "Old man Henderson passed away last month." "I'm sorry to hear that," Sophia said. "He was a good neighbor when he lived here." His son's selling the original homestead, another 80 acres that borders our north pasture. He offered it to us first, before putting it on the market. Sophia turned to look at her husband, recognizing the familiar spark in his eye. You want to buy it? I'm thinking about it, Frederick admitted. Not for us really, but for the children, for their future. We're already the largest ranch in the valley, Sophia pointed out. Do we need more? It's not about need, Frederick said thoughtfully. It's about legacy. Building something that will outlast us. Something the children and their children can continue to grow. Sophia leaned her head against his shoulder. Then we should buy it. Our children deserve the same opportunity we had to build a life, to find love, to create a home. Frederick pressed a kiss to her temple. Have I told you lately how much I love you, Mrs. Dawson? Every day, Sophia replied, smiling, but I never tire of hearing it. I love you, Frederick said, his voice as sincere as it had been on the day he first spoke those words beside their fireplace. More today than yesterday, and not as much as tomorrow. As darkness fell, and the first stars appeared above the mountains, Frederick and Sophia remained on the porch, the gentle creaking of the swing matching the rhythm of their hearts. From inside the house came the sounds of their children's laughter, conversation, the occasional playful argument, the music of the family they had created together. I never imagined, when I was so sick on that ship, that my life would turn out like this, Sophia said softly. That I would find such happiness. And I never imagined, when I stood on that dock with my mother's ginger tea, that the pale, seasick woman I was waiting for would become the center of my world, Frederick replied. But here we are. Here we are, Sophia echoed, watching a shooting star streak across the vast New Mexico sky. Home,